Hari Om Swamiji.
Yeah. Can hear? So you can introduce Pajwal. Can you hear?
Yeah. I'm able to hear. Good evening, everyone. Welcome to the continuation of the discussion on the foundational texts of Indian philosophy. This meeting will be recorded and it will be posted on YouTube. So if you have missed any of the previous discussions, you may find it on YouTube. There would be a question and answer segment at the end of the discussion. If you have any questions, please feel free to unmute yourselves and ask. Please use the raise hand feature of Zoom in order to maintain the queue. If you are not speaking, please mute yourselves in order to minimize the disturbances. Thank you.
Thank you.
Recording in progress.
Om Sthapakaya cha dharmasya sarvadharmaswarupine avatara varisthaya Ramakrishnaya te namaha Sruti Smriti Purananam Alayam Karunalayam Namami Bhagavad Padam Shankaram Loka Shankaram. So we are continuing our discussion on the Brahma Sutras, which is in fact the most important of the foundational text of Advaita Vedanta. Now, I mentioned this at the very beginning. This text and the commentaries on this text. There are innumerable commentaries, not only by Shankaracharya, by other great Indian philosophers like Ramanujacharya, Madhvacharya, Vallabha, Nimbarka, and of course the commentary from the Chaitanya school, Baladeva's commentary. There are many commentaries. So now the commentaries on this text contain a number of ideas. Some of these ideas are not necessarily linked to the metaphysics of Advaita Vedanta. Some social issues also will be discussed here. So this should be understood. Many of the customs and traditions and conventions of those times, not 8th century it was Shankaracharya's time, but the times in which the sutras must have been written thousands of years ago, all those can be seen reflected in this text and also the commentaries. But the running theme, the central theme of the text and the commentaries is Brahma Vidya. I mean the science of spiritual enlightenment. That's the central theme. In between you find many issues. Many social issues are discussed. I shall give some examples today, or just maybe this may be of interest to you. Then I will come to the subject that we left last week. I mean the rebirth theory, which is still there are many interesting things to be discussed about it. But to give an example of the diversity of the subjects and topics discussed, and the sweep and reach of the text and the commentaries, I shall give an example. In many of these sutras and the commentaries on the sutras, you find ideas that reflect the social conventions of those times. Those times, they were not the times of democracies or egalitarian values. They were monarchies mostly. Now, in such context, Shankaracharya doesn't expound his philosophy. He doesn't justify or criticize the social conventions of those times. He was not a revolutionary in the sense that we understand a social revolutionary ideal in our own times. He was a great exponent of a great philosophy. So whenever he had to cope with issues, deal with issues which are related to social conventions and practices, he really didn't give his own views. One good example, and you can see that it comes in the uh, here it comes, it's called Apasudradhikaranam. And to give you just one example, I'm just giving one example. I shall tell you the context, those who may not be interested, but to give an example of the social conditions of those times. Well, it comes in the in the third pada of the first chapter. Now, in this particular sutra, there is one sutra, Shugasya tat anadra sravanat tat adravanat suchedehi. This is sutra. The sutra itself may not, if you read the English translation of the sutras, it may not make much sense, because it has got a connection, a link with a story that is mentioned in another book, in another text, Chandogya Upanishad, other Upanishads. Now, there was, to give an example, there was a king, and his name was Janasuti. This Janasuti was one day, to give an example, one day he was sitting on the terrace of his palace. Now, at that time, two sages of those times, two philosophers, let us say, they disguised as swans, So, again, you may ask this question. That means they could change their forms as they wanted. They disguised themselves as swans. It is called Hamsa in Sanskrit and many Indian vernaculars. And they were sitting on a tree and they were discussing. And one of these birds said, "Oh, this Janasuti is a great man, wonderful man, he's a great philosopher, he's an enlightened man," and so on. Then in response to this, the other bird, the Hamsa, said, "Oh, you are totally mistaken. This fellow is nothing. There's a great sage, his name is Raikua, staying in a forest somewhere. And he was driving a bullock cart. He was a humble man, sitting in a distant village or a forest. Compared to him, this king is nothing. He is a total ignoramus. So you don't praise this king in front of me." The other bird told. Now the Janasuti, he was eagerly listening to this. So he felt very much humiliated, very sad that these birds have got such a low opinion about his knowledge and wisdom. But he was not angry. He went in search of this sage. The sage's name is Raikua. And he went long distance. Finally, he reached a forest. There he found an old fellow with a long beard, with a bundle, and he was sitting in front of an old bullock cart, and his body also was full of all kinds of skin diseases and all that. But his face was very bright. So the king thought, "But this man appears to be a beggar." But he's not a beggar, because there is an expression on his face which reveals his wisdom. So I'm going to ask him for spiritual instruction. Now, that story is referred to in this sutra, Shugasya tat anadra sravanad. So what means? Shuk means sorrow. Asya means to this king. The king became so sad, so humiliated, that these two birds had got such a low opinion about his wisdom. So he felt so sorry. So shedding tears, he ran in search of the great sage they were referring to, Raikwa. So the sutra, it compresses the whole story in a small pithy statement, Shugasya, Tadanadrasravana, Tadadravana, Suchadehi. The sutra is indication of this particular predicament of the king. He became so sorry because he heard these birds talking in such a humiliating language, disparaging language about him. So, Anadrasravana, he heard these humiliating words. And Adravana, and his heart burned. It melted. And then he ran towards this sage, this story. Now, when he reached there, the sage didn't bother about him. He called him by a very disrespectful epithet. Hey Sudrahani, you fellow, what do you come here for? So that made him more humiliated. Then finally the story goes like that. This sage teaches him Brahma Vidya. So now, based on this sutra, a number of social issues, social questions are put forward, are still being put forward by not Sanskrit scholars, but mostly social revolutionaries in India. This is an insult. Sudra means an outcast. So, and Shankar, when Shankaracharya wrote a commentary on this, there's no philosophy to be made out of this. But the great Badarayana wrote such a sutra. So, Shankaracharya just wrote a commentary based on or in the light of the conventions and social practices of those times. So, there he doesn't play the role of a revolutionary. Not at all. He just goes on Smriti, Smriti. It's a Smriti statement. A number of Smriti statements are stated in other Nasudre Padagam Kinjit Nacha Samskaram Arhadi Manusmriti. All these are quoted in other commentaries. So in all these commentaries what Shankaracharya says is certain conventions prevailed and he doesn't say yes or no about this. He doesn't play the role of a revolutionary. Now to understand the meaning of what I said, Shankaracharya was a revolutionary. I can give some examples from one of his well-known poetical works. One of the most famous, but it's a very short poetical work. It's only 5 verses. It's called Manisha Panchakam. Manisha means refined intellect. Refined intellect, that is Medha, Manisha. And also a man with a deep insight and farsight also may be called Manishi, a person endowed with Manisha. It's a verse in 5 couplets. It's a poem in 5 verses, 5 couplets. Now, it is in the form of a story, a narration. So, sometimes you find many great sages, many great saints, even when they have attained the highest wisdom, they still retain unconsciously, they still retain some of the characteristics of their social background. It's natural. See, if you read the Bible, the allegories, the parables, all taken from the pastoral background of the Judeo-Christian tradition. So Christ talks about distributing a small number of fish among large number of people. Now if you go to Gujarat state, or if you talk to Jains, for example, the religious tradition that Gandhi is supposed to have belonged to, no, they can't go anywhere near fish or meat. For Jesus Christ is talking about distributing fish and he's a great saint. How do they understand this? So to understand a sage or a saint or a prophet or religious teacher, he's in a way is a product of his circumstances and his times. At the same time, he is also beyond his times and beyond the circumstances that shape him, because otherwise he won't be a prophet. If a man is a creature of circumstances, only a primitive man is a creature of circumstances. An enlightened man, of course, there will be the influence of the social conditions of his times, in his personality, in his teachings, but also there will be something far higher and greater in his teachings. That's why he is distinguished as a philosopher. Now one day, this story is given from Shankaracharya's life. It's very interesting. One day, he was living in Kashi or Benares, and after taking bath in the holy river Ganga, he was walking through the streets of the holy city of Kashi, and then for a moment, his old samskaras, tendencies, the orthodox Brahmin, the aristocratic Brahminical tradition that he belonged to, all that suddenly came upon him. And he found in front of him an outcast coming, maybe leading a few dogs. So he told him, keep away from my path. The moment he uttered that word, immediately the outcast asked him one question. The question is, "O great ascetic, you please tell me, you want me to keep a distance from you by uttering, go away? Is it addressed from one body to another body? Or is that go away addressed from one soul to another soul?" The moment these words came from the outcast's mouth, Shankaracharya prostrated before him. Then the outcast suddenly appeared at Lord Shiva, the deity of the holy temple of Kashi. Immediately, he recited 5 verses. What's the meaning of the verse? I am fully convinced in my heart that he is the very soul which manifests in all human beings, in all states of consciousness, whether sleeping state, waking state, or deep sleep states, and is the witnesser of all. The same Atman manifests in everyone, in the great teacher, in the great sage, and also in the humblest of human beings. And the one who teaches this great lesson to me, whether he is Lord Shiva himself or maybe the low outcast, he is my respectable teacher. I am his humble disciple. This is with this statement he prostrates before this outcast, who immediately appeared to him the Shiva form. Now you find this sometimes happening. You find in the life of Sri Ramakrishna, in the life of many Swami Vivekananda, when he traveled to some place and suddenly he's this kind of, that pedigree, or maybe I should keep away from that. Immediately it came, but Vivekananda immediately realized some little, a few words could bring him back to his consciousness. Sri Ramakrishna, you find, very traditional person. He went around cleaning the places of people, common people, outcasts and others, to shed his own sense of pedigree. So Ashtapasha, sense of pedigree, sense of heredity, sense of shame, sense of keeping others away, any kind of feeling or emotions that gives us the feeling that we are distinct or different from others. So the moment this, they say, it comes like this: Annamayat annamayam athava chaitanyameva chaitanyat itivara durikartum vanjasi kim bruhi gaccha iti. Kim bruhi getcha getcha iti. What are you talking about? Where you said I should move away from you. Who should move away from whom? Your body is made of 5 elements. My body is made of 5 elements. You are the Atman within. I am also the Atman within. So, he asked this question, Annamayat Annamayam Athava Chaitanyameva Chaitanyat. Your Chaitanyam means you are the Atman, the self-effulgent Atman. I am also the self-effulgent Atman, because that Atman is present everywhere, in everything, whether in the pure Ganga water or in the water of the ditch. Everywhere the same Brahman, same Atman exists. So, who should move away from whom? Simple statement. But Shankaracharya was always a realized person. That was enough for him to realize his mistake. So all his pedigree, everything just disappeared in 1 second, in one split second. Then he says, Jagras Swapna Susuptisu Sphudataraya Samvidu Brumjade Ya Brahmadivi Pipiliganta Tanushu Proda Jigat Sakshini Saivaham Nacha Drishyavastudi Didaprajnabi Yasyasti Chet. Then it's very important. Chandalostu Sa Tu Dijostu Guruhu Ityesha Manisha Mama. You know the statement? Something Chandalostu, both you find. So, Chandalostu, Satu, Dijostu. Whether he is an outcast or is a learned Brahmin or a sage. Saha, Mama Guru, he is my Guru, he is my teacher. Iti, Esha, Manisha Mama. This is my realization, this is my conviction. Now, this statement, Chandalostu Sadu Dijostu Guruhu iti esha manisha mama. I am convinced, this is my considered opinion, this is my conviction, my conclusion, and have no doubt, whoever may be that person, and whoever may be the person who brings this light of equality to me, he is my Guru, whoever it may be. This is repeated in 2 verses in the 5 verses. After the 5 verses, this particular statement, Chandalostu Satu Dijostu Guruhu iti esha manisha mama. This is repeated twice in this poem of 5 verses. So this is the man. So you can imagine what's the difference between this is discussed in the Brahma Sutra Bhashya. When you are a spiritual practitioner, when you are an enlightened person, sometimes because of the physical embodiment, because the body is still the old instrument. So you may have realized the Supreme, but once a while, maybe all the ignorance, all the aristocracy, all the sense of pride may suddenly appear, maybe in a split second, but immediately an enlightened person will be able to correct himself. That is so I am giving this example. So those of you who may read Brahma Sutra later, you may also find many of the statements here. So the Upanishad literature also. Chandogya and Brihadaranyaka Upanishad, very huge. The biggest of the Upanishads is Brihadaranyaka. Next biggest is Chandogya. In these Upanishads you find a number of social questions, some conventions and traditions that prevailed in a society that lived long before even the agrarian age began, mostly the old Vedic age, which produced the Upanishad literature. Agrarian settlements had not yet fully started. There were cities, Kashi for example, it was a city that existed even 3rd or 4th or 5th millennium BC, no doubt. But they are all small settlements of sages, of philosophers, and there will be a king, that's a monarch, that's all. So, in such a situation, there were many conventions and traditions. So, they are referred to in the Brahma Sutras. When Shankaracharya writes commentaries, he doesn't say this is correct or this is not correct. So, but then when this important incident I brought to your attention, because that gives us a glance into the deep personality, the profoundness of this man's personality, Shankaracharya. He wrote all this, but when still felt that he made a mistake, immediately he corrected and he prostrated before the outcast and told him, "You are my teacher. You gave me this enlightenment." So this is a very interesting thing. Now we will come to one very important sutra that throws further light on this concept of rebirth and also the journey of the soul after death. The sutra, it comes, I think, comes in the first chapter, second pada. Second pada means second quarter. Brahma Sutra has got 4 chapters. Each chapter will have 4 quarters. It's called pada. And each quarter, pada, will have several sutras. This particular sutra is the 16th sutra of the first chapter, the second pada. Sutra is very simple. Srutopanishatka gati abhidhanat cha. This means Srutopanishatka gati abhidhanat cha. What it says is this. In some Shruti, the word Shruti is always used in this context in the sense of Upanishads. So, those who read just translations, when you read this word, the Shruti, if you go to Monier Williams or Apte, they will give you, Shruti means Vedas. Then you go to Samhita, Brahmana, that's not the implication here. It means Upanishad. So whenever Shankaracharya refers to Shruti, unless he refers otherwise, of course there are quotations from Brahmanas, Aranyakas, Samhitas, of course, is a reference to Shruti. So here, a particular statement in the Prasnopanishad is referred to here. So what's the statement? Those who have listened to the statements of the Upanishads and have done spiritual practice, their journey after death will be in the direction of the northern path. That's the meaning. It's called Uttarayana Marga or Archiradi Marga. So I can explain this in the light of this. For example, those who have got Gita, for example, Bhagavad Gita, you find those who take the northern path, it is stated, Sukla Krishne Gidi Hede Jagata Shashwade Mate Ekaya Yadi Anavrittim Anyaya Avartade Punaha. Now, this sloka continues, and it is stated that those who follow the northern path are those who have practiced spiritual disciplines, who have practiced sense of renunciation, have perfected yamas and niyamas, they practice morality, and when they die, they follow a particular path. That path is called either Archiradi Marga or Devayana. Means, Archi means, The archi actually means that a little spark, bright spark, is associated with the cremation flame. Now, when we talk about this in this modern age, when the body is pushed to the tube, you don't see any fire or flame or anything. It's an ancient concept. What it means is Agnir Jyoti Rakas Shuklak Shanmasa de Uttarayanam Tatra Prayada Gechandi Brahma Vido Janaha. Fire, flame, daytime, the bright fortnight, the 6 months of the northern passage of the sun, taking this bath, the knowers of Brahman go to Brahman. Those who don't have access to Sanskrit books, and those who really want a modern exposition in English of the description of a soul's journey after death, referred to here, you may read the first volume of Hajime Nakamura. Is a well-known, maybe the most articulate, the most profound exponent of and translator of Indian philosophy, including Buddhism. He was a Japanese scholar who labored for decades translating manuscripts from Tibetan and Chinese into English, of course with the help of translators, other well-known translators. So Hajime Nakamura's book you can read. You may find perhaps descriptions there. He has written well-known books, the history of early history of Advaita Vedanta. Many books he has written. So, just to give an example, because this is an interesting subject. So, those who live a good life, practicing some higher morality, ethics, renunciation, charity, good life, they will die in Uttarayana Marga, northern half of the year. And then they will follow this path. This path is called Devayana, the path of the gods, it is said. And stage by stage, they will ascend to higher and higher levels of existence. That is, Agnihi, Aha, Agni means fire, Jyoti means light, then Aha means daytime, Shukla means the bright, Shanmasa, the 6 months, Uttarayana means the northern passage of the sun. Northern passage of the sun, when the sun is in the ascendant. Now, they slowly evolve and finally they realize Brahman. They will not come back. In other means, there is no rebirth for them. So, who are subjected to rebirth? Those who have still some desires clinging in their mind. Those who have still some unfulfilled ambitions. And they die leaving in their mind some unfulfilled ambitions and desires. These desires bring them back. Because these desires will exist in the Sukshma Sharira, in the form of samskaras, vasanas and vrittis. And technically, there is one psychological explanation which people tried, at least I used to give. When a person dies, the moment of his death in a way defines the kind of life he has led. More or less, not necessarily. But the way we live our life will somehow influence our emotions and feelings at the time of death. Because at the time of death, a person may feel a total emptiness. All that you loved and valued and prized and cared for, suddenly you've come face to face with this reality. It won't be yours any longer. I give this example, one interesting example in Fyodor Dostoevsky's The Idiot, a well-known book. It is a very well-known book. It's not as well-known as Crime and Punishment or The Brothers of Karamazov. But there is one character. Actually, the story, this particular narrative is taken from Dostoevsky's life itself. The story goes like this. A criminal was about to be sentenced to death. And he found that those who were in front of him were going one after another, will be hanged or maybe shot. And finally he realizes that he has only 10 minutes or maybe less than that left. So he's thinking, how should I spend the only 10 minutes that I have got to live? He's a good man. So he began to think. First he started shaking hands with other criminals who were waiting behind him. And then he began to think of his own life. Then he suddenly remembered, oh, long ago when I was a child, I threw a stone at a dog. I should not have done it. He repented. And again, he again started thinking, oh, maybe I have told a lie to another person. I cheated another person. I should not have done it. And his mind became clear. So, every minute he thought was a new life for him. Suppose such a man gets a new life, either he will go mad, or he will become a genius, or he will become a saint. You can see this happening in many of the saints. It has happened. When they push themselves in one direction so much, whether Saint Francis of Assisi, Saint Augustine. Francis of Assisi was a soldier. Saint Augustine, even in his own mother's opinion, he was not a good man, if you know Saint Augustine's story. But his life, he pushed his life too much in one direction. He reached rock bottom, so he could not descend further. Suddenly he started ascending, and he became a saint. So in this case, in Dostoevsky's character, of course, it's taken from his own life. I don't want to go to that part of it. Many of you must have. Dostoevsky was himself sentenced to death, and then at the last moment, when just before being shot, the Tsar's messenger came with a white flag waving, and he was given clemency, and then he was sent to Siberia as an alternate punishment, and then he came back again, and that was the time when he started. And a drunkard became the greatest genius in the history of Western creative fiction. Dostoevsky. All the crime and punishment, or all these, the results of this complete sudden 180 turn, became a genius. So the point is, it said that one's last moment, in a way, will be shaped directly or indirectly by all the moments he had lived till then. So those who have spent their lifetime with a higher ideal, some spiritual discipline, some spiritual ideal, when the moment comes, for them it's not a big deal. It's American language, It's not a big deal. They face this with a smile. So that's what is stated here. Agnir Jyotirahak Shukla Shanmasa Uttarayanam. We have no way of verifying this, remember. But you see, we know that Archi, according to some commentators, refers to the flame, the bright flame at the time of the cremation fire. But you cannot really make it an absolute point in an age where there is no cremation fire. There is only electricity. So, but again, what it essentially means is those who live a good life, they ascend to a higher level of existence, which gradually takes them to the highest spiritual enlightenment, and they are not reborn, they are not born again. That's an important thing. On the other hand, those Dhumo Ratristhadha Krishna Shanmasa Dakshinayanam Tatra Chandramasam Jyotihi Yogi Prapya Nivartade. On the other hand, smoke, nighttime, dark fortnight, the 6 months of the southern passage of the sun, Taking this path, the yogi attaining lunar light returns. On the other hand, there are those who have practiced yoga, lot of meditation, lot of good actions. So you are a yogi, but still some ambitions are left at the lower layers of the mental system. They are still there. And that will cause you to be born again. And then gradually you move further. We referred to this in the previous class, dealing with some verses from the 6th chapter of the Gita. Already discussed here, so we no need to repeat again. You can refer to the previous class. What it essentially means is, those who have listened to the Upanishad statements, this particular Brahma Sutra means, they said, Sutopanishadka Gyatya Vidhanacha. What it means, they are not born again also because of the statements from the Upanishads. Here, this Prasnopanishad mantras are referred to here. So this is a technique Shankaracharya uses. So one sutra is there, and that is interpreted, and then by interpreting a number of mantras and verses from different Upanishads, including Bhagavad Gita. Here Bhagavad Gita is quoted here. Remember, if you read the Shankaracharya's commentary, even English translation, sometimes called the Smriti. Smriti here means Bhagavad Gita. So Smriti doesn't mean Vyasa Smriti or Narada Smriti, because Bhagavad Gita belongs to Mahabharata, which technically belongs to Smriti Prasthana. So it's called Smriti statement. So the one important mantra from Prasnopanishad is referred to here to substantiate and to expound the particular Brahma Sutra. The mantra is Atauttarena tapasa brahmacharyena saddhaya vidyaya atmanam anushya adityam abhijayante etadvai prananam ayatanam etad amurdam abhayam etad parayanam edasmanna punaravartande ityesha nirodhastadesha slokaha. So this is a mantra from Prasnopanishad. So this Prasnopanishad mantra is brought here to substantiate, to expound this particular Brahma Sutra. So it's an interesting text. That text itself contains just 555 pithy statements. And then there is a huge commentary. While writing this commentary, for each sutra, a number of Upanishad statements and other scriptural statements are brought forward. And there is a long argument. It's very interesting. So, what this Prasnopanishad mantra says is, for those who have sought Atman by austerity, those who have practiced renunciation. So if you practice renunciation, well, this is enough, I don't want any more money. Then in your next life, you won't have any desire for money. It may not happen just because you have money. It can happen only when you have no more desire for money. It only happens. So, for those who have sought Atman by austerity, abstinence, keeping self-restrained abstinence. Then strong faith, a sense of sanctity and sacredness. That's meant here. Shraddha means. When we approach a spiritual subject, we should approach it thinking that it is something sacred, something important. That's why Ada uttarena tapasa brahmacharyena saddhaya vidyaya. So, atmanam anushya. So when we meditate on Atman, we should do that thinking that this is sacred, a sanctified spiritual discipline. And then what happens? Then we take this path, northern path. And then what happens? Such a person will not be born again. That's the idea behind. It's a very famous mantra. So this is quoted here. And Shankaracharya also quotes the Gita mantra, Gita sloka, Agnir Johirata Krishna, Shukla Shanmasa Uttarayanam, Tattva prayada gachanti brahma brahmavido janaha, etc. This is a technique used in this great work. Means a mantra is taken, then that mantra is substantiated, the sutra is substantiated with a number of quotations from so many Vedic statements. One may ask this question, what's the use of this kind of method? This is a very important thing to do. And that is a very important thing, we should remember that. One important reason why Hinduism practically had no such thing as a fanaticism, at least traditionally, no. You find India welcomed followers of different religions, from Judaism, from Christianity, from Parsi religion, from Zoroastrian religion, even from Islam. The second oldest mosque in the world is in India. It came into existence almost during the time of Prophet Muhammad, if you know the history, but it's still there. It goes back to 6th or 7th century AD. And your churches belonging to 2nd century AD. Synagogues belong to 1st century AD. You can find. So what he means is this happened because whenever there is a difference of opinion on deciding what's the central theme of a book, they always decided on the basis of the statements from the Upanishads. And whenever there is a conflict between the statements of the Upanishads, which are all universal spiritual ideas, that's the essence of Upanishadic messages. So whenever there is a conflict between any book and the Upanishads, the views of the Upanishads were upheld, considered to be authentic, and the views of the non-Upanishadic scriptures became irrelevant. This is an important thing. So many of these Smritis and Puranas, many of these books may contain ideas, and their own authors tell you again and again, don't think these ideas are for all times. Don't take them literally. They are all statements and values and ideas framed for those times, during those days, those ancient times. But if you are looking for values and teachings and ideas which have a universal, eternal relevance, then you should turn to the Upanishads. These statements are made repeatedly by the authors of, not Upanishads, but the authors of Smritis. They say, whenever we happen to differ from the views of the Upanishads or Vedas, you don't listen to us. You listen to the Upanishads. That is, Sudhi Smriti Virodeshu Sudhireva Gariyasi. Avirodhe Sattu Sada Karyam Smartam Vaidika Vasada. This is Jabala Smriti. Jabala wrote a Smriti. And he says, don't listen to his own Smritis. Smriti means constitutions, codes, conventions, traditions, and so on. He says, don't listen to his own Smriti if he contradicts the teachings of the Upanishads. Again, Vyasa says, Sudhi Smriti Purananam Virodho Yatra Drishyade Tatra Sraudam Pramanam Syat Toyodvaidhi Smriti Dvara. Upanishads, so the Upanishads are mentioned by Shruti. The other word is Smriti, which stand for constitutions, conventions and traditions of different social conventions and ideas and practices. So whenever there is a conflict between the Upanishad, between Shruti and the changing contemporary textbooks, you listen only to the statements of the Upanishads and don't listen to anything else, or Puranas. This is again and again you find this in the teachings of the Upanishads. So whenever there is a contradiction between some statements in some books and the universal ideas of the Upanishads, which talk about the spiritual oneness and unity of existence, then you should uphold and consider as authentic the statements of the Upanishads and discard everything else. This is an important thing. This is in fact, this idea is being repeated again and again by Shankaracharya. So you find in the Brahma Sutra Bhashya of Shankaracharya, when you read, you find many statements. He is quoting from some books as such. He is not giving his views. He is not either justifying or criticizing. What is driving home is again and again the idea that unity and oneness of existence. Life is meant to, our life is designed to take us to the highest spiritual goal. That is a running theme. And in the midst of all that, you find a number of social conventions and other things are mentioned. It's a very huge book. So my only purpose is to give an idea, because you will come across a number of diverse subjects here. So why this book talks about these customs, conventions. That is how it is designed. That's all. Thank you. Thank you, Namaskar. You are most welcome with questions.
Namaste, Swamiji.
Yeah.
I have a couple of questions.
Yeah.
So, the first part that you were, can you hear me?
Right now you ask questions on what we discussed here. Okay. Because there are
So in the first part,
certain
when you were
questions require
discussing the
long
Shankaras,
answers. Yeah. Come on.
Shankaras about the Brahma Sutra, the social context that you were discussing at the beginning of the lecture.
Yeah.
So two questions I have. First is, so Shankara also interpreted social context in, for example, in Gita, when he was explaining, for example, Chadurvarnyam Maya Srishtam part. So in that
do you
part,
know his interpretation of that? Do you know? He says Chadurvarnyam. He says Chadurvarnyam Maya Srishtam. He says, these four varnas are based on guna karma vibhagasya. Guna vibhagaha, karma vibhagasya, guna karma vibhagasya. Then Shankaracharya, his commentary, Madhusudana and others say, these are classifications based on human temperaments and corresponding human actions. So when you find a person who is active, ambitious, he is a professional, or he may be a soldier, we call him Kshatriya. If he is doing business, he is a Vaishya. So if he is meditating, he is a Brahmana. So that's why Shankaracharya says elsewhere that in the same family you can have all the four types of people, and you also may and you can move forward and backward in this ladder of evolution by your own efforts. It's a very flexible. What it later became, that will take you to an entirely different context. What it later became it became a prejudice, it became a monopoly, it became an institution based on birth, that is absolutely against and contrary to Shankaracharya's own teachings. It always became. Do you imagine Karl Marx would have imagined what happened in Soviet Union when Lenin established Bolshevik Republic? There were special supermarkets for the members of the Soviet Presidium, in Soviet Union. There were townships where only the members of the Communist Party alone could live. I'm talking about the history of Bolshevik socialism in the Soviet Union for 70 years. So we cannot blame anybody for that. Like that, in ancient India, in course of time, monopoly started, special privileges started, special prerogatives started. And that's why again and again Shankaracharya refers again and again Srudireva Gariyasi. Whenever you find a teaching which is divisive, which sanctions social inequality, and a statement in the Upanishads which project the unity and oneness of humanity, then you should give importance to the statement from the Upanishads which talks about the equality and oneness of humanity. It's It's a very important thing. I think this was what actually saved Hinduism. That's why you find, for example, whenever different, you can find in India, I don't know if this ever happened in any other society. In India, you find the same family. You may follow, you may worship God in one way, or you may not go to temple at all. And your father may be worshipping another deity, and he may not like to read the book you are reading. And so you can find that. So this diversity was possible because all these different rituals and puja or meditation, whatever it is, they are primarily based on the Upanishadic idea. The diversity is because of giving importance to Smritis and Puranas. But the basis is Upanishad. When you come to Upanishad, you find unity and oneness. When you come to Puranas more like, Hindu Puranas read more like Homer's Iliad and Odyssey. You can find lot of action, thriller, Hindu Puranas you find. Many of the Puranas, a lot of action you find. Like Odyssey or Homer, Iliad you find. Iliad is very similar to Ramayana. A different way, of course, you cannot compare, but there is a striking comparison also among some scholars. So the point is, Puranas need not be. There are some Puranas which are very profound in their spiritual implications, like Bhagavata Purana. But there are many other Puranas which are, it's just like literature, they are all literature. Another, that's why, in Vedantic tradition, Hindu tradition, nobody says this particular letter is important, don't change it, comes from God. God comes only when you practice it. Great teaching. Otherwise, just a letter. You print ink and printing ink and piece of paper. That's all. So that is what Upanishad also says. Nama eva. Word only, going beyond that. Then only you become experience. It becomes experience. It's an important thing. Books are not the paramount authorities. Books are not inviolable. They are not infallible. They are not non-negotiable. Books can be and should be reinterpreted according to changing times. What did Vivekananda do? Nothing but interpreting Upanishads for our times. You see? Vivekananda, what did he do? He just interpreted Upanishad for our times. Today, that's a currency. Because he spoke in English, wrote in English, or language of the world today. Like that. So, this is a statement in Arnold Toynbee, study of history, referring to India's historical context. In India, a prophet stands in the middle of the past and the present, and he brings for the best of the past, reinterprets in his life, and reinterprets in his language and hands over to the next generation. A prophet stands at the junction of history. It's past and present, that's what he says, Toynbee. So, this freedom to reinterpret, the freedom to redefine ancient books, the total rejection of the idea of the infallibility of a book or a word, the total rejection of the idea that this word, this comma, this full stop comes from God, so don't change it. Vedanta will not accept that. You can change it, but its essence should not be changed. And that you understand when you practice. It's a very important word. Sri Ramakrishna makes a simple statement. Sri Ramakrishna is so simple. He says, all the books are like a list. You go to Trader Joe's, to supermarket with a list of items that you want to buy. If you don't go and buy the paper, you cannot eat the paper. You have to buy the groceries, other things you have listed in the paper, and buy and cook, then only you can eat. So once you buy these things, the list is useless. So also for a man of spiritual experience, books are useless. It doesn't mean that he throws away the book into the ocean, no. For him, the books are no longer the most important thing. He will not throw away his Bhagavad Gita and Upanishads. But still, he goes beyond the written word of the books. That's the idea behind. Srutya, you read the book. Yuktya, use your reasoning power. And Swanubhutya, bring it to your own life. That is what Shankaracharya says. Can you think of any other tradition which tells you this book is holy, true, the book is not everything. You should go beyond the book. That's the idea behind. If we can really tell you everyone should go beyond the book, there will be no problem in the world, really speaking. Books are important, but books are only meant to be transcended. They should not become prison houses. They should be a means for us to go beyond. That's the idea. That's the... Swami Vivekananda, in his paper on Hinduism in Chicago addresses, you can find some of these ideas he puts forward in very forceful language. Thank you for the question. Now we go to another...
Just one...
No, wait a minute. No, next question. It should not
Yeah.
take long time. Yeah. Thank you for the question. Anyone else?
Hello, Swami.
Yeah.
I had a question. So I had a question just to follow up on that, but I also had a separate question.
Yeah.
The question to follow up. So then even the Upanishads are considered like the almanac that doesn't give rain, or the shopping list. So even the Upanishads are considered.
Precisely. Exactly. In fact, there is one vacham akojaratvat. Shankaracharya said in Brahma Sutras means vak means a word. Books. They entered the whole world of books, scriptures called vak. That means books cannot see the truth. It means books cannot realize the truth. But then books are important. As an indication, what we call as what Vyangya means in Sanskrit is called. Let's say by implication, you may think a book like the Upanishad is sacred, or Gita is sacred, because these books contain some great ideas. So that book is sacred. That's true. Just like the chair on which your grandfather sat for a long time, for 50 years, you think you should be preserved. It's important. It's a matter of yours. That's all. But your chair is not your grandfather. But it reminds you of the great sacred, sweet memories of your grandfather sitting there. Like that, all books are to be transcended. Books are important, but one should go beyond books. Remember, nobody throws away the books. Really, nobody. See, once a person realizes and reaches that level of maturity and wisdom, then should I throw away the book because I have already realized what the book says? He doesn't bother to throw away to preserve it. He won't think the book is all that important. No, will he throw away? It's not a big consideration for him. Sri Ramakrishna also used to keep with him some books and all that. But he used to say, books, if you squeeze an almanac, you won't get water. In this context, the almanac tells you you are going to get a lot of rains this month, but the almanac cannot give you water.
So how does one reconcile that with when Sri Ramakrishna says that Rama and his name are the same? Because we're hearing that the words are the same as God, and yet...
Yeah. So, when you, that is for a spiritual practitioner. Not for the one, actually in real life, when you practice devotion, uttering a sacred name, you can reach the experience only when you see total identity and oneness between the name and what the name indicates. Otherwise, you will not get it. In the mantra practice, in mantra shastra, the highest level is para. At para level, when you utter a mantra, you experience the identity of the mantra with the deity the mantra indicates. It's an experience that goes beyond definition in words. So at that level, you don't distinguish the two. Not only that, if you distinguish the two, you cannot make progress through mantra japa. No one can practice mantra japa and make progress if he thinks that mantra is one thing, what the mantra implies is something else. You will not make 1 inch progress. Total identity is one important condition for the effectiveness of mantra japa as a spiritual sadhana, no doubt about it. But when you reach that highest experience, then you don't really bother about it. You don't, should I see the mantra? That thought will not come to us. Very often, the reasoning process that we do before we reach that level of experience has no value once you reach that experience. The questions that we ask when we are children have no value when we grow up. That's the idea. Not that we don't want to ask, but those questions are not relevant. That's all. Questions do not get answered, questions just become irrelevant. That's why they disappear. Spiritual life also. In spiritual life, our questions never get answered. We transcend that particular stage of asking questions. So questions just get self-destruct. It's got a process of self-destruction. They just disappear without an effort. That's the idea.
Thank you, Swami.
Yeah, thank you. So you find,
Swami?
Yeah, you find many of these books contain a lot of ideas that reflect the social, political conditions of those ancient times. Which so many of them, and when the commentator deals with them, he leaves them as such, because his main focus is somewhere else. Otherwise, Vedas are such a huge corpus. He doesn't quote from all of them. He takes only Upanishads. Even the Chandogya and Brihadaranyaka Upanishad, there are many things that are not at all spiritually very relevant. He never bothers about them. That's the idea. I have to get a full picture of the situation. Today I refer to some of these things. Okay, to give a more comprehensive rational picture of this text.
Are the Brahma Sutras considered lower than the Upanishads then?
No. Upanishads are the basis for Brahma Sutra. Brahma Sutra can be understood and are understood only in the light of Upanishads. No doubt about it. But Upanishadic literature also huge. In the Chandogya, Brihadaranyaka Upanishad, you find a lot of rituals are referred to. A number of tribal customs are referred to. Number of such tribal customs in the ancient Vedic tribes, how they lived, all those you can find, social conditions, all you can find. But Shankaracharya never, he also wrote commentaries, but he just commented in the light of the contemporary times, of those times. He comes into his elements only when he deals with these metaphysical statements, because that is his main focus. That's the idea. His main focus is to tell you that existence is one, humanity is one, reality is one, and that reality is present in all of us. That he wants to emphasize. But you cannot be blind to the entire huge Chandogya and Brihadaranyaka. So many tribal customs, social conditions, so many characteristics and peculiarities of the monarchies of those times, you find there are not much value from a spiritual perspective. Because times have changed, but there are some timeless, unchanging realities. That's the idea. Thank you. The greatness of Upanishad, Shankaracharya, throw away all the unnecessary things he tells you. He doesn't say every word is coming from some source or every word should be preserved if you cannot change the meaning in modern. No, he doesn't say that. Don't bother. See, nobody bothers. He says all absolute rubbish himself. He makes fun of many of the ritualists also. Many fun. It's an interesting principle. Yeah, thank you.
Sriram, you can ask your question.
Yeah.
There is one more question from YouTube. I'll ask next.
Technically, what is the Brahma Sutras? You said the Bhagavad Gita is part of the Mahabharata, which is a Purana, if I remember right.
Excuse me, what is?
Technically, what scripture is the Brahma Sutra? It's not Shruti, is it Smriti, is it Purana?
Okay, I tell you, okay. Now, it's not a Purana. Brahma Sutras are 555 sutras. Sutra means some pithy statements, not necessarily always in full sentences or even words. Panini's Vyakarana Sutras are of a different type. So, in Vedanta, there are three foundational texts or three foundations, may be called Prasthana. Shruti Prasthana, 10 Upanishads that Shankaracharya commented upon. Smriti Prasthana, Bhagavad Gita is Smriti Prasthana. Nyaya Prasthana means a way of logically analyzing and coming to the Advaitic conclusion, bringing the Advaitic into a meaning from various Upanishad statements. And these 555 sutras are explained in the light of different quotations, various quotations from the Upanishadic literature. So everything is explained in the light of Upanishads. It's called Nyaya Prasthana. Nyaya means logic.
There is one question from YouTube.
Yeah.
By Bala Sivan Kohli.
Yeah.
The question is, Upanishads are the fundamental texts.
Yeah.
Why are most Hindus practicing only the ceremonial aspects?
Yeah, okay. Now, Upanishads are the fundamental text. At the same time, the Upanishads do not reject rituals or the ceremonies. Because without ceremonies and rituals, no society can practice religious or spiritual values. It's a fact. A society cannot exist on the basis of philosophy. So, but the Upanishads tell you that you may practice rituals, different ceremonies, but they alone do not constitute the whole of spirituality. So the idea that the whole humanity is one, the same divine reality, Atman present everywhere in everything, that is clearly stated only in the Upanishadic literature. So that's why Upanishads are important. But that statement should not remain a statement, it becomes our experience. For that, we have to become spiritually pure. For that, we should practice Karma Yoga. Karma Yoga includes not only doing our duties, but also performing rituals, performing all this with a great dedication, devotion that will purify our mind and intellect. Rituals may not take you to supreme goal, but rituals can remove many obstacles from our path. That's the important thing. You can easily
Ranjit,
see
we
if
have
you
time.
go to perform a puja, if you listen to any of the uh, bhajans or devotional music, you feel a kind of, here the Sanfas, they call it, they get a lot of energy. So that's the language they use. I don't disapprove of that approach. It actually, it happens because our mind feels a lot of inner refreshment. We feel invigorated. That's a real relevance of rituals and ceremonies. Okay, thank you.
We have time. Ranjit, you can ask your second question.
So yeah, one more question about the Brahma
Please,
Sutra.
please,
So
please.
the part you said about the social context today, when I was reading the Brahma Sutra, going through that, it felt to me that it is completely out of context. It looks like a digression because the whole of Brahma Sutra talks about the knowledge of
Yeah,
Brahman and other things. And this particular part looked very out of context.
That's precisely I brought to discussion today, because anyone who reads Brahma Sutras will suddenly be surprised. It is not just a single. Remember, the sutras, when they were written, we do not know. But the age of Badarayana Sutras is very ancient. Shankara's time only 8th century AD. Badarayana Sutras must be much more ancient, thousands of years earlier. So, what were the customs and practices of those times? They are reflected in Brahma Sutras. And of course, there are views who tell you it is an interpolation. That's again a subject, that's a topic about which there is a debate going on. Because in such a brief class, I don't want to drag any of you into that scholarly debate and views for and against the old school or new school. I don't want to do that. But the point is, you find many such contradictory subjects. You see a well-coordinated book where everything is well organized, following a particular chronology. That should be a very modern book. The more ancient, the more the older a book, the more disorganized a book may be, a text may be. You find that. In the Upanishadic literature also you find, for example, some of the Upanishads are so well coordinated. Kathopanishad, more or less well coordinated. So Ishavasya Upanishad. What about Chandogya and Brihadaranyaka and all you find? So many stories, so many tribal stories are brought forward. So it's an ancient book. And these Upanishads were taught and patronized and followed in different Vedic schools, in different families, in different geographical parts of India, including Nepal. So naturally there will be a lot of differences from different schools. Even Max Muller had to collect the different versions of Rig Veda from all over India when he brought out the standardized version, edited the standardized version of Rig Veda Samhita. The ancient books are like that. They are not like a well organized book that you write in modern age, modern times. No. That's the idea behind it. So if you read the Old Testament, you find a lot of stories, migrations and views and some prayers and not very, some very violent, angry tones in which God speaks. You can find all that. Because that reflects the times of the times in which these books evolved. It's an important thing to remember. That's how one studies a book. So many of the ancient texts will not be a well organized, chronologically well defined structure. No, you don't find it. That's why one should try to listen to some of these classes along with self-effort. Otherwise we may not know why there is so much of contradictions and conflicting opinions. If you want a well-organized book, Bhagavad Gita is a much better organized book compared to Brahma Sutras. And Brahma Sutras you won't understand unless you read some commentaries. People started understanding meaning only after Shankaracharya wrote the commentary. So he must have heard certain interpretations in his times. So some of them he just repeated. That's how it is found in this age, in the society. That's a meaning. But when he comes to dealing with the fundamental metaphysical principles of the Upanishadic Vedanta philosophy, there he is fully uncompromising. Okay? Very vocal.
Maharaj, there are no more questions.
Yeah, thank
One
you,
last, can you repeat the name of the book by Hajime Nakamura?
Hajime
That you
Nakamura.
recommend?
If you go to Google, you find, I think, the early history of Advaita Vedanta, something like that, the 2 volumes.
Okay.
I think they were published by Motilal Benares Das once upon a time. I do not know. You have to
Okay, Maharaj.
you have to make further inquiry about it. Okay. Okay. Yeah. Hajime
No more.
Nakamura. He's a Japanese scholar, highly decorated. I think he was given Padma Bhushan or Padma Shri by the government of India for his great work long ago. He did it long ago, and his books were translated into English and published, I think, first time by University of Berkeley. The scholars helped him to publish his doctorate thesis was in Japanese, perhaps. See, it's a huge book, such great work. This man lived only for this great work.
Could it be said, Swami, that Shankara was inspired like Swami Vivekananda too? Like some of his commentaries might have just been sort of spontaneous,
Yeah,
like Swami Vivekananda?
So, yeah, no, Swami Vivekananda in modern times, he did not bother to write a commentary like that. What Swami Vivekananda did, I think if you look at his whole work and contribution, he had 2 important goals in his mind. First, to give a modern interpretation of our ancient wisdom, including Vedanta, yoga and so on, in the light of modern science and technology and modern Western way of understanding things. It's a very important thing. And he wanted to do it, bring it to a rational level. So, essentially Swami Vivekananda had received an excellent Western education. He was familiar with Hume, Schopenhauer, and all the great thinkers of 19th century. He read all those books. So he was a product of modern education, especially philosophy and history. So he wanted to give a modern interpretation to our ancient wisdom without deviating from the central teachings. And again, he brings into this idea of the synthesis of science and technology, Western values, Western ways of understanding, and that India's own traditional wisdom. This synthesis and harmony. That was his central theme. And he did a great job, in fact. Today we are discussing philosophy in this distant land, Indian philosophy and Vedanta, because of Vivekananda's work. So, and in a way you can say it was a commentary. Yeah, you can say in English he wrote a commentary. But a commentary is a bhashya. Bhashya has got certain other characteristics which were not required for somebody like Vivekananda who wrote, reinterpreted Upanishadic philosophy in 19th century, later half of 19th century. It's very important. Yeah. Thank you for the wonderful question. Om Shanti 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 Harihi Om Tat Sat Sri Ramakrishna Pranamastu.
Rama.
Recording stopped.
Yes, these are important announcements for all of you. Please remember, please listen. Very important announcements. There will be no class next Sunday, that is April 30th. Please remember, there will be no foundational text of Indian philosophy class on April 30th due to our Shanti Asrama program on Saturday, April 29th. On Shanti Asrama, we have an important program. That's the first Hindu monastery established outside Asian continent. In 1900, an American devotee of Swami Vivekananda donated about 166 acres of land, and Swami Vivekananda delegated Swami Tattwamayanandaji to come to San Antonio Valley, Northern California, and he established the Shanti Asrama, and it continued for a long time. And Tattwamayanandaji left for India, and then Tattwamayanandaji continued, but in the 1950s there was a big fire. So all the cabins, wooden cabins, except the shrine building were burned. So the shrine building still stands there, all the way from 1900. So in memory of this glorious ancient heritage, we conduct a retreat every year on the last Saturday of April. This year it falls on 29th of April. So it begins at 11 o'clock in the morning, it will be over by 5 o'clock. San Antonio Valley, Shanti Asrama. So there will be no class next week, that is on April 30th, there will be no class on the foundational text of Indian philosophy. Thank you.